Hello and welcome. I'm Connie Cooper, Executive Director of Seattle Chamber Music Society, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening to our beautiful Center for Chamber Music, where we have begun our online summer festival preparations and rehearsals. We have a wonderful lineup of 12 different performances to share with you between July 17th and September 13th. If you haven't yet ordered your subscription, of course those are available, but for now we're happy to tell you about some of the pieces that you'll have a chance to hear this summer. James, what have we got on the lineup here?
Well, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. We have a lot of amazing music. Unfortunately, we won't have anywhere near the amount of time to talk about everything that we're going to be doing, but I have some of my great friends here to talk about a few of the selections. I'm going to start with the wonderful pianist Alessio Bax here. Alessio and I have been busy all day playing the Respighi piano quintet, Ottorino Respighi, an early quintet that I didn't know at all until you told me about this piece 2 or 3 years ago, and I am really excited about it. I'm curious, when was your first performance of the piece? What was your first experience?
I think I encountered it about over 20 years ago at the Ottawa Chamber Music Festival, and then hadn't played it since until maybe a couple of years ago at another festival. But I really fell in love with it. It's such a special piece, such a special language and idiom, Respighi, and in this format it's quite unique, very different from any other piano quintet.
Yeah, it's nice that he isn't trying to write another Brahms quintet, another Dvorak quintet, another Schumann quintet. There's something special about it. It's a unique piece with his unique voice, and even at this young age, it's earlier than most of the music of Respighi that I know. But we were talking about this earlier, how some of that incredible beauty and the drive and excitement and the color, all the things that define his music so beautifully, I think they're all in place.
They're all already there, and he had just come back from Russia, where he was invited as a principal violist at the Russian Imperial Orchestra, and that's where he met and studied briefly with Rimsky-Korsakov. And that, of course, he learned so much about orchestration, and that led him to write his great tone poems and all of that. But in this music, there's a lot of influence from his roots. His teacher, Giuseppe Martucci from Bologna. It's music full of beauty, full of pathos and excitement, as you say. I love the structure of it too. There's a big first movement with a great development where it really doesn't leave any stones unturned. Emotionally, I think there's everything in there. And then a very short and beautiful second movement that continues in the third movement. It's incredible contrast. And then there's the special, without giving too much away, that beautiful theme, which we obviously didn't last long enough because it's so gorgeous. We just wanted to keep going. Comes back right before this incredible, crazy coda.
Yeah, very exciting. I always find it fascinating when you come across chamber works by composers that are most known for, say, large orchestral works. Of course, Respighi wrote a lot of music for a lot of different forces, but I think audiences today tend to think of him for Pines of Rome, Falcons of Rome, that these pieces that are so spectacular. And I think this piece, despite having only 5 players, is quite spectacular.
It's definitely orchestral.
Absolutely, yeah, and very spectacular, especially when you play it. So
I think it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, indeed, and will be a lot of fun when we film that tomorrow. So thank you, Alessio. I'm going to move things along and bring my next victim here. We have Augustin. Hello, Augustin. One of my favorite violinists and people here, Augustin Hadelich. Augustin, we are going to be playing in a couple of days George Walker's first string quartet.
That's right, yeah.
And as you very helpfully pointed out shortly before we started filming, George Walker was not a Texas Ranger. Am I correct about
That's
this?
right.
This is not Walker.
That's right. It's a common misconception.
Yes.
But I'm glad we cleared it up before
Excellent.
we even start playing it.
Well, what else can you tell me about this piece?
Okay, George Walker. He was born in the 1920s, and he wrote this when he was just 24 years old. I think 1956, something like that. And it's probably most famous for the slow movement, which is one of, I don't know, there are a number of what one could, call like great slow movements for strings. And this is one of them. Barber Adagio for strings is another one, or Nimrod. It's one of those unbelievably beautiful moments in the literature, and so I'm really looking forward to. I've never played the piece before, but I'm really looking forward to playing it. And what else? So George Walker is probably one of the most important African American composers.
Mm-hmm.
He just passed away quite recently,
right?
Just
a few years ago, I believe.
3 years ago. So he was almost 100 years old. So he lived a very long life and wrote, a lot of a lot of repertoire. And but I think this is sort of stands out as probably one of his most well-known works.
Yeah, it's interesting how the piece was written so young in his career, and his style developed into something much, much more angular, I guess you would say. As the century developed, I think his style sort of followed certain compositional trends as we got more into the mid-century.
I think you can really tell the influence of Samuel Barber, I think.
Well, it's so interesting how the pieces have these parallels,
because the Barber String Quartet, where the Adagio for strings is from, that was probably 10 years earlier, something like that, in the 1930s. And even even in the other movements, there's something Barberesque about. Is that a word?
It is now.
Barberesque. I don't know. About his writing, yes, at this point.
Yeah, and I believe that both pieces were written either while or very shortly after they each graduated from the Curtis Institute. So there was this incredible sort of lineage there. And of course, you mentioned the second movement of the Walker. For listeners out there, it's very possible that you know the second movement as a string orchestra piece.
Lyric for strings,
right? Yeah. And but much as it gives me pleasure to play the Barber Quartet, because people can then discover the roots of that piece. This is a chance for people to discover where that lyric for strings came from, how the piece developed, and so I'm greatly looking forward to doing that with you, Augustine. Thanks for joining us today.
All right.
I'm going to call my next guest here. This is cellist Efe Baltacıgil. How's it going, man? Good to see you.
Long time no see.
Yeah, indeed.
Hi.
Always great to see you. Always great to have you on our series. And you're actually going to be closing the entire festival, I believe, with the Brahms C minor piano quartet.
That's right. That's right.
Is a great favorite of all of ours.
As a cellist, that Andante, that I think every cellist is in love with that third movement.
Yes.
And when you asked me to talk about this piece, I started to look into it more deeply, and I actually realized that actually Brahms wrote this first. He started working on this piece before he wrote the number 1 and 2, and originally it was in C sharp minor, and then
that'd be a little more complicated, wouldn't
it?
And
then premiere was made and just finished around 1877, and then shortly after that he was on the piano and he played the premiere, but he started in 1855, almost 20 years before, more than 20 years before, and that coincides with his friend and mentor Robert Schumann's last few years and his declining mental health and very untimely death. And probably the theory behind it that he had to stop writing this, and at that very difficult time. And however, he kept the third Andante original. He did not change it, but the rest of the piece altered quite a bit. Instead of C sharp minor, he put it down to C minor. The first movement changed quite a bit, and he inserted scherzo, the second movement, and the third movement just completely left untouched, which gives me the feeling that he really liked it very much.
Yeah, he knew when he got it right.
That's right. And then he added the last movement. Fourth movement was a later edition. And when there's a letter surviving there for his explanation for particularly the first movement of the C minor piano quartet, that he talks about Goethe's Young Werther adventure, the very much the essence of the piece. For the first movement, he talks about curiosity, and he also talks about the last chapter of a young man, and referring to the characters being in love with his best friend's wife and then killing himself.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of tragic C minor for the first movement is very heavy, and it really affects the first two movements quite a bit, and then the third movement comes with the most amazing melody, and then the last movement transposes us into a beautiful C major at the very end. And I'm so looking forward to be part of it. And last winter was a great delight to have the opportunity to be here.
Have some
and
more
play
Brahms.
the Brahms.
Right, yeah, the
And
major trio.
thank you for letting me play the Opus 99, the F major sonata. I'm so looking forward to that. And also the C minor trio that's coming up.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the connection between Brahms and Schumann, because we have sort of a thread moving through this whole series with that incredible time in the 19th century where you had a very young Brahms mingling with the Schumanns, and of course the Schumanns were very friendly lived in the same city as Mendelssohn. We're going to be playing some Mendelssohn very soon, and there's quite a bit of Schumann on this series. I'm probably going to lose track of all the Schumann, in fact, that we're doing, but we have the first string quartet, we have the third piano trio, we have the third violin sonata. I'll speak a little bit about that. We have the piano quintet. The piano quintet shares a very interesting connection with Mendelssohn that I did not know until recently, that the second trio of the third movement of the Schumann piano quintet was added at Mendelssohn's suggestion. Yeah, apparently these musicians were all playing their works for one another, and Schumann said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, Bob, what this piece needs is another trio." And of course, it's such a wonderful part of the piece. But I really became... I've always been a huge fan of Robert Schumann, but I think that there are times in my life where I go so deeply down that wormhole, I think I'll never get out. And his music is so special, and in a festival like this, where we're broadcasting from our home to your home, I think the intimacy of that music can be appreciated in a unique, very special way. These Schumann pieces that we're playing are all different, but none of them could possibly have been written by anybody else. And the third violin sonata, I said I would mention that a little bit. Is this a piece that you play, by the way?
No, I mean there are some of the movements are part of the FAA sonata.
Yes, right? Yeah.
And so I've played those before, but I mean it's that kind of Schumann writing that is so insane that then it's I looked at it, I was like, what? I was like, am I holding this upside down? Like what?
Well, it's amazing how Schumann would get excited about an idea of something compositionally.
Yeah.
And he, for example, the string quartets, he never wrote any quartets until he decided, I'm going to write quartets. So he didn't write a quartet, he wrote 3 quartets. Near the end of his compositional career, he had, of course, written, including the violin, for a number of years, but he got really excited about the violin, and in quite short order he wrote the violin concerto, 3 violin sonatas, the fantasy for a violin and orchestra. It was a little bit of an obsession. I think he was a bit of an obsessive guy. And yet you mentioned the very young Johannes Brahms contributing a movement, and Schumann's pupil Albert Dietrich writing a movement, and it was written as a present. You can talk about this a bit.
I mean, poor Dietrich. I think to be Dietrich in this trio of composers is kind of unfortunate, right? Because
it's a little rough.
Yeah. So he made the first movement, but Schumann has the like slow intermezzo and the last movement, and the FAE sonata. It was a present for Joachim, if I remember, and FAE stands for frei aber einsam. Which means free but lonely, which was a phrase in Romanticism that people used a lot, and it like this romantic notion. And Anyway.
Yeah, well,
it's funny. It's this collaborative sonata that, of course, nowadays what's played most often from it is the scherzo by Brahms, which is often that's done all the time.
In a way, Brahms's first piece that gets played. I mean, apparently when he came to visit the Schumanns, which is just an amazing thing, he showed up at their door and had some letter of introduction and said, "Hi, I'm Joe," and they said, "Great, come on in," and he just stayed, and they became great friends. And of course, the relationship with Clara, Robert's wife, lasted till the end of her life. But yeah, most of the music, he apparently had a huge pile of music that he brought to show Schumann, and
he had some of his piano music already, like the early piano sonatas, I think, were already finished.
They think possibly the Opus 4 scherzo and at least one of the sonatas, but there's tantalizing reference to things that have long since disappeared that he burned.
Yeah, he burned a lot of his music, which is why every piece by Brahms is great. There's no bad Brahms.
There's no bad Brahms.
That's why he did it.
Not that I've heard. But yeah, this third sonata, as you mentioned, comes from this collaborative sonata, and Schumann, having written two movements for it, thought, well, why should I let these go to waste? And he, in short order, composed two more movements that his wife was very fond of at the time that they were written, but very shortly thereafter he slipped into the mental illness that eventually killed him. And that music was so painful for Clara to revisit. There were even pieces from earlier in his life, from earlier episodes of mental illness, that she could not bear to revisit. Fortunately, though she did try to suppress this music, it did survive. Very sadly, there was a set of cello romances. Do you know this? That were burned by Clara, and we are. I mean, I guess if anyone had the right to do it, it was her, but that's a loss. But there were two other movements written for this sonata, and it was really this third violin sonata only started getting played kind of probably within our lifetimes.
So have you done it a lot?
No, I haven't. And this is going to be my first experience with it, and I'm really, really excited. I really, really love it. Before we go today, I'm actually going to we're going to play a video of a little mini interview I did with our commissioned composer this year, the wonderful Canadian composer Jocelyn Morlock, who, because of travel restrictions, will not unfortunately be joining us in person, but thanks to the wonders of technology, we were able to have a little talk via Zoom earlier. So Jocelyn wrote a wind quintet for us this year, thanks to the Seattle Chamber Music Society Commissioning Club. It is a piece called Unfurl. So in a minute we will be able to get up Jocelyn's speaking about the piece a little bit. So thank you all very much for joining us, and thank you guys for joining us. I'm so happy to be back making music with all of you, and it's going to be a great summer. Well, Jocelyn, we are delighted at Seattle Chamber Music Society to have you as our commissioned composer for the 2021 Summer Festival. You've written this beautiful piece, Unfurl, and I'd love to hear directly from you, your inspiration for the piece, how it came into being, and any thoughts you'd like to share with our audience.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, James. It's been a wonderful opportunity. It would be a wonderful opportunity any year, but especially this year, to be able to write a new piece it's a really hopeful, awesome, exciting thing. So the title of my quintet is Unfurl, and that came from a poem called For a New Beginning, written by John O'Donohue. I read it after hearing that it was sent to President Joe Biden by the Irish President Michael D. Higgins on the occasion of his inauguration, which was approximately the same time that I started writing this piece. I hope that its mood of optimism and growth will characterize 2021 after the long and difficult times of 2020. Unfurl is a similarly hopeful piece. It's somewhat bucolic. It was written during the late winter and early spring of 2021 as I witnessed rebirth and resurgence beginning in the natural world and also in our own human one. I'd like to thank the Seattle Chamber Music Society Commission Club and you, James, for doing this. And what can I tell you? I guess the most important line that I loved from John O'Donohue's poem was, "Unfurl yourself that just provoked so many beautiful images in me, including like an almost physical image of a sound coming out and sort of rising gently. I mean, a little bit like what you might hear in, say, Appalachian Spring of Aaron Copland, or in Samuel Barber's music, summer music, which has to be my main influence. I mean, it's hard to write a wind quintet without taking that as an influence, and I think it's just like the ideal piece. I think other sounds you might hear as influences in my work are just bird-like sounds. You're going to hear a lot of melody that sounds like bird, something kind of natural. That pretty much covers most of the basic ideas within the piece, and something just sort of gentle and optimistic.
Well, of course, I won't, unfortunately, be able to play it since I'm not a wind player. But I've enjoyed so much, listening to the demo that you prepared for us and looking through the score. And yeah, I think that it really does encompass a lot of the feelings that we're all going through now. This hopeful sense of kind of rebirth of society. I think I found it to be a very optimistic piece, and I've always loved the way that your music evolves so organically, and the way that this piece unfurls makes the title seem so very apt. Sometimes we come across pieces where we can't quite get that connection between the title and the music, but in this case, it really seemed like a beautiful piece that was also ideal for our times. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, thank you so much.